Okay, well, our second article that will be presented today is from Gabriela Tonietto from Rutgers University and Alex Barasch from INSEAD and NYU. This research examines how the use of technology during entertainment events influences consumers' subsequent enjoyment of that event. So welcome, Gabriela and Alex. We look forward to learning more about your paper and your results.
Thank you, Chris, and thanks again for including us in this webinar. We're very excited to have the opportunity to share our research and really hope that those of you listening will find it interesting. So we're going to be talking today about consumer content creation. So it's probably not much of a surprise to anyone listening that consumers generate a great deal of content. You know, they're texting their friends and family, they're posting to social media a great deal. And in recent times, the trend that we're seeing is that increasingly this behavior is occurring during experiences as they're actually unfolding. So just to put this into some kind of numerical perspective, in 2016, during the most popular non-televised events, so things like concerts and festivals, over 10 million posts were created and posted to social media during those events across the year. Perhaps even more startling of a number, just to get an idea of how incredibly common this behavior is, during Lady Gaga's Super Bowl halftime show performance, so just during that roughly half-hour performance, over 5 million tweets were posted during that time. So clearly this is an extremely common behavior, and consumers seem to be engaging in this behavior increasingly, where they're using their technology really to comment on the experiences that they're having as they're actually unfolding. But what remains to be seen actually is whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. So is this something that's potentially harming consumers? Is it making them distracted during their experiences, or perhaps could it instead actually be beneficial, helping them to actually get more out of their experiences? And that's really the crux of our research. So there's certainly a lay belief out there that technology use and content creation could be harmful. A quick scan of the popular press in recent years reveals, a plethora of advice columns telling consumers to put their phones away. And the key implication here is that in order to be truly in the moment and to enjoy your experiences, consumers need to put those phones down. But of course, as I just showed you on the previous slide, this behavior is clearly very persistent. And so if in fact generating content during experiences is harmful to experiences, then you might wonder, well, shouldn't consumers have learned that and decreased this behavior? Whereas if anything, it is in fact increasing. So that led us to ask, can this behavior of generating content during experiences by texting or posting to social media actually increase consumers' enjoyment of their experiences? So my co-author and I conducted 9 studies to test this possibility, and we find that contrary to this popular press advice, consumers who generate content about their ongoing experiences actually feel more in the moment. They're more engaged and immersed in their experiences. And as a result, those who generate content actually enjoy their experiences more. So now I'd like to turn it over to my co-author, Alex, to outline a sample of the types of studies that we conducted in order to examine this research question.
Thanks, Gabby. I will start by just giving you a little experimental overview with a sample study here that we actually were inspired by the stats that Gabby showed you from the Super Bowl in 2018. We ran a study during the Super Bowl of 2019. We were interested in how creating content during the Super Bowl halftime performance would affect consumers' enjoyment. So this study was conducted in 2 stages, and that was so that we could recruit participants who plan to watch the Super Bowl halftime show and give them instructions in advance. In particular, we randomly assigned them to different content creation conditions. In the no content creation condition, participants are instructed not to create any content during the halftime show, just to watch the experience as they normally would. In the content creation condition, they are actually instructed to create content in whatever manner they liked. So they could write text, they could post to social media. This allows us to examine consumers' natural content creation behaviors. And in addition, in this particular study, we included a 3rd condition that was an additional control group. It is the unrelated tech use condition, instructing participants to use their devices, but in a way that's unrelated to the halftime show. And importantly, this allows us to control for the use of technology and also the act of writing, but also at the same time allowing us to isolate the effect of generating relevant content about the experience. Participants then watched the Super Bowl show as they normally would and responded to several questions. And the key finding for us here, as you can see there at the right, is that those who generate content during the experience that's relevant to the halftime show, they feel like they enjoy that experience more than either of the other 2 conditions. And interestingly, this effect is driven by how immersed or engaged they feel in the experience. Basically, creating content that's relevant to the halftime show allows people to become more absorbed, to feel like they're losing themselves in the experience. And this is something that we consistently find across numerous studies, looking at other types of experiences, including people's holiday experiences, virtual safari tours, dance performances, horror films, and bus tours that they go on. So this is something that we have found a lot in our research, and it actually led us to revisit that literature and some of those intuitions that Gabby referenced earlier, documenting negative effects of technology usage. Why is it that people have such strong lay beliefs that tech usage is harming their experiences? And as it turns out, actually, these detrimental effects that have been shown before actually have occurred under very specific experimental conditions, where participants are asked to use technology to pursue goals in ways that actually conflicts with the task at hand. So they're maybe asked to multitask while doing something else. They're asked to look at their smartphone while engaging in a face-to-face conversation. But of course, this is not always the case. We oftentimes, as consumers, use our phones to record or share our perceptions, our thoughts, our feelings about the focal experience itself. And what we're finding in our research here is that that actually enables consumers to do things in a way that's integral or complementary to the experience, and that can actually have really positive effects on both enjoyment and immersion. So with that, I'd like to actually turn the floor back over to Gabby to talk about our next steps, which actually looked to uncover ways that firms could promote this behavior and encourage content creation so that consumers can reap those rewards of enhancing their experiences.
Thanks, Alex. So we find this consistent evidence that, in fact, this behavior has positives for consumers. So that begs the question, what can marketers do about this? Can we actually successfully encourage content creation? And then, of course, the follow-up question to that that's equally, if not more important, is whether consumers who engage in this behavior because of marketing actions reap the same benefits. So we know, organically pulling out your phone and texting a friend seems to have, consistent positive effects. But what happens if you're actually encouraged to do this by, someone with skin in the game, someone who actually has a motivation for you, such as, the firm that's actually offering a particular experience or service encounter? So we conducted 3 studies that systematically test 2 key potential strategies for encouraging content creation and examined both whether it increased that core behavior as well as whether those who create content in response to those strategies reap those same experiential benefits. So the first strategy that we looked at was tying an incentive to content creation, right? So this is something that marketers are already doing, potentially for other reasons, such as just increasing positive word of mouth. But can it likewise have these downstream experiential benefits? So in this particular study, as an example, the participants were told that if they chose to engage in this behavior, then they would be entered into a raffle for a chance at a monetary bonus. And across 2 studies, we found that consumers who were incentivized to create content indeed were more likely to follow through and engage in this behavior. They were about 2 to 3.5 times as likely to create content with an incentive as opposed to without one. And perhaps even more importantly, those who created content because of an incentive also reported that they felt more immersed and engaged, and that they enjoyed the experience more compared to those who were not offered an incentive at all. So it seems to be the case that actually offering these incentives, 1, leads to the desired behavior, but 2, that desired behavior does in fact produce those same experiential benefits where those consumers are ultimately enjoying the event more. So building on this, we were curious as to whether non-monetary types of interventions might also be similarly efficacious at increasing content creation among consumers. So we tested a second strategy that is, potentially a lower cost that's based simply on a communication of a norm. So we adopted what's known as a norm nudge, where you're simply communicating either that the key behavior is extremely common or is perhaps not very common among consumer groups. In this study, we also looked at, something that many event organizers are using, which is actually having their own customizable platform. So things like Hova and FestApp and Alumfa here offer this service to experiential marketers to be able to allow their consumers to communicate with each other during experiences. So the participants were told that they were going to go on a tour and that the company uses one of these customizable apps, and either they were presented with a high social norm that 90% of their fellow customers download and use the app, or a low social norm that only 10% do. And we find that consumers were approximately twice as likely to generate content when they were told that many of their fellow customers are also engaging in this behavior, downloading and using this app to create content. And once again, we find that those who choose to generate content feel more immersed and enjoy their experience more as the result of this norm nudge. So the implications for marketers from this research are quite clear. We provide robust evidence that generating content creation is beneficial for consumers, but it's something of a win-win for marketers, where, of course, enjoyment has been linked to several other important beneficial and productive behaviors for us from the firm's perspective, right? So consumers who enjoy themselves more are more likely to recommend it to friends and maybe repeat the experience. So by encouraging content creation, marketers can not only help their consumers reap more from the individual experience, but also potentially lead to some of those beneficial downstream consequences. So ways that marketers can, in fact, increase this behavior among their consumers, we showed evidence that offering a reward or incentive works. That's an efficacious strategy, as well as communicating a strong social norm. Some other ideas might be to, utilize branded hashtags, as well as being, an active member of social media yourself as a brand, where brands that are more active can also at times, have more active users on social media on the part of their consumers to be a part of that. And as well as potentially considering utilizing these customizable sharing platforms for your consumers to connect with each other during their experiences. And I just want to emphasize, really a result that we were very excited about because it really shows the potential power of these strategies for encouraging content creation, is that consumers who were encouraged to generate content, from a marketing communication, indeed reaped the same experiential benefits as those who created content organically or who, self-selected into this behavior without any firm intervention. And then finally, I just want to emphasize, we showed one study, and as Alex briefly mentioned, we did in fact run many studies and test these effects across a variety of different experiences, including, people's real holiday experiences that spanned several hours and were social. So, people who were taking their kids trick-or-treating, or families at Thanksgiving dinner. And we find similar effects in those types of experiences. And even during experiences where you might think that this behavior is particularly counter-normative or less common, such as during movies. Okay, so that wraps up our investigation as implications. So, sorry, I think more than one of us is hitting next.
I'm sorry about that, Gabby. And thank you.
No
Thank you
worries.
very much. I'll go ahead and click us forward. Thank you so much, both of you. That was super interesting. And we have some questions here. Let me go ahead and start with one. Does generating content improve all types of experiences, or are there some types of experiences that you either found in your studies or that you have some views about that where creating content might be detrimental?
So there are some that we tested. Really, these effects are largest for experiences that are meant to be enjoyable. So things that are fun. Experiences that are inherently negative, we also tested, something that you don't really want to do, or that might be a little gross, or something like that, which, we can test in the lab. People become more immersed when they generate content, but that doesn't necessarily increase their enjoyment, probably because they're really getting drawn in to something that's really, igniting negative feelings, right? And is not a pleasant experience. But of course, that being said, there are likely certain types of experiences where it would be very difficult to generate content, or generating content would necessarily force you to stop the experience. I don't think I could dance and do this, or, just as an example. So if you're, engaging in something that's very active or extremely fast-paced, we would be tentative to say that generating content is going to also offer these benefits in that type of realm.
That's interesting. And so one of the questions that I had in the back of my mind as you were talking, you talked about the immersion, that the action of posting and being on your phone, et cetera, that further immerses the consumer into the experience. So, I think that you're getting at kind of the idea of flow, maybe the Csikszentmihalyi's work, that where people are drawn in. Why is it that yields such a pleasurable emotion? Why do people end up getting more gratification from being drawn more deeply, immersing themselves more deeply into these experiences? What do you think, or what have you found in that regard?
Well, there's a few reasons. One is that, in fact, prior research has found that flow and feeling deeply immersed is itself pleasant. It's something that, we as human beings just sort of like. So that's one way that it can feed into enjoyment. Another is, and something we didn't talk about for the sake of time in this presentation, is another measure that we were interested in and have across our studies is actually time perception, and this feeling that time is just flying during the experience, which, work has shown immersion does. The more we're drawn into the experience, we get this sense of pleasure, and we feel like time is just flying, which is intricately linked to this feeling that I'm enjoying myself. So I think that there's multiple paths that getting drawn in to an experience can really boost your enjoyment for that experience.
So interesting. So Elsa has a question here about, did you use any observational data? I'm sure that there were, this is a topic where it's going on all the time, as you noted. And in your paper, do you document any use of any observational data in your studies, or what do you think about that idea?
Yeah, absolutely. So we used some Twitter data, mostly sort of to get an idea of how common this behavior is. In particular, how common is it to generate content during the experience as opposed to, say, before or after the experience? So as an example of some of the data we got, we actually scraped Twitter data about the Game of Thrones series finale, the last episode that aired of Game of Thrones, was a cool opportunity that's a little related to actually the previous research, because usually Twitter is silent during popular TV shows because posting spoilers would be a big taboo. But that was relaxed for the airing of Game of Thrones because it was expected that everyone was going to be watching this live. So we actually scraped the data referencing Game of Thrones and the series finale. And during that hour and a half approximately that it aired, we saw a huge boost in traffic of people using this hashtag. So, and certainly more so than in fact, there was more Twitter activity during that hour and a half than the 6 hours leading up to the episode, as well as the 6 hours following the episode. Providing some field evidence that, we're seeing this activity during experiences themselves. Then in terms of real life data, things that are outside of the lab, in addition to our Super Bowl study, we also surveyed people about their holiday experiences to get something that's a bit more natural, so without a manipulation, but just what did you do to celebrate Halloween or Thanksgiving are the two experiences that we used. To what extent they engaged in content creation. We got a measure of the types of content they were creating and the types of things that they were talking about, to be able to then link that up to how they rated their past holiday experiences. And we find that, people across our two samples, about 80 to 85%, people are saying, yeah, I created content during my experience, and also that those who did, in fact, reported greater immersion and enjoyment as well.
Nice. And so let me just back up on one point, which is that you went through some of the strategies that marketers could employ to increase this kind of behavior. But Did you also have any, or do you have any thoughts or evidence around the aspects of the experience itself that could increase content creation? Are consumers, in other words, are consumers more likely to create content during some experiences than others?
Yeah, I think that there are certainly experiences that feel more quote unquote shareable. So, some research certainly shows that people are more likely to share, things that are special or exciting. Within our own data, really the only thing that really stood out was when we used films as the experience, that rates of content creation really drop the minute the experience is a film. Across our other experiences, left to their own devices, we would get 30 to 80% of people generating content sort of their own accord. Whereas for a film, that drops to like 10 to 15%, which I would speculate has something to do with sort of social norms, or, we've all been to the movie theater and the first thing they do is tell you to put your phone away. There's an idea that this is the type of experience that's sort of sacred, right? That we don't engage in this behavior during those types of experiences. Though I will mention that even during that experience, we did find this beneficial effect of creating content.
That's interesting. I'm going to sneak in one final question, if you can answer relatively quickly, which is, do you think this works for advertising? Do you have any sense that if consumers are asked to create content when they're viewing advertising, that would actually increase their positive feelings about maybe the brand, the ad, the company, any of those outcomes?
Wow, that's a really cool idea. Because we, have used certainly video experiences that would potentially be similar, if we're talking about an ad with maybe a little bit of storytelling, something positive, something on the enjoyable side, I think it's definitely possible that these types of effects could extend to advertising information. And looking at something like, opinions or attitudes towards the brand would be a very interesting extension of this work.
Well, we will look for you to return in the next couple of years and present that to us. I'm sure that the marketers who are listening would find that to be a very the answer to that question to be a very powerful lesson. Well, thank you so much, Gabby and Alex. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
Thank you again for having us.